Oh, must be Saturday. Saturday means ask me anything, and it means ask me anything here on the Football Diehards YouTube channel. I'm Bob Harris. None of you know that. Okay, probably all of you know that. And I'm happy to see everyone here. Golf Boy, Andrea, James, Mr. Scampers. Hello. Dame Overboard, always here. Always good to see everybody. Appreciate your time. You know the drill. Hit the subscribe. Most of you are already subscribed, but if you're not subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Do the notification bell. All the YouTube things that make YouTube happy make me happy as well. I'm going to dislike me just so somebody has. You know, I love that. I hope everyone's doing well. We're drawing into the month of May, midway through. Working on the fine Fantasy Football Pro Forecast magazine as we speak right now. Well, these will be hitting the newsstands soon enough. Y'all hopefully you enjoy them. You want to go to the FootballDiehards.com website. I work there. You can go and use the promo code DieHards to get a 15% discount on anything you'd like to purchase. Hello, Matthew. Thanks for coming in. Hello, Charles. Thanks, everyone. Hope you all get in here and gather around. We've got a great guest today. We've been having some great guests, and I'm happy to continue the string today. We'll go ahead and bring her in right now. Britt Flinn, you know her from Fantasy Alarm, Fighting Chance Fantasy, many places. And you hear her on many radio programs, including on the Football Diehards on occasion, and I'll make an effort to do more of that. Britt, how you doing?
I'm so good. Thank you for having me. I wore my Metallica hat specifically for you.
I thought it might be. I've got tickets to the show here in Dallas. I've got both shows when they're coming in August. I've set the time aside. It doesn't coincide with the expo. I was going to have a fight Bob Long to make sure they didn't that there were no conflicts there. But everything's good to go. You've got a lot going on. Fantasy Alarm doing great stuff there. I wanted to give you a second to talk about because you have something coming up. With the Women of Fantasy Football, you do the Her Story in the Making, the podcast you've been doing. My good friend Lisa Ann is coming on with you. Tell me what you got going on there.
Man, I'm so incredibly excited. And if I've said this once, I'll say it 100 more times. I'm just pinching myself because this is actually happening. Her Story in the Making is typically used to highlight up-and-coming female content creators in the space, but on occasion, we want to highlight somebody who has established themselves in the industry and want to know what their path was getting into the industry, what advice they have for new content creators, and what better person than Lisa Ann. I mean, she is an icon, and I cannot wait to have her on the show. It's going to be on Better Sports Network. We're going to stream it live on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. So it's going to be a little special time slot. And instead of our normal 30 minutes, we're going to go an hour. So it's going to be really exciting.
It'll take an hour. She's fantastic. It'll be a good time. Love talking to her. And good morning, Albert. Good morning, Wendy. Early, our friend in the chat here as well. So you guys know the drill. If you have questions, Britt and I are going to chop it up and run through some of the situations, circumstances, and items of interest to us. And if you have items of interest to you, chime in the chat. We love it when you do that. And we appreciate you all coming again. So I want to just start out, and I kind of like to go through positions. And I know you're drafting the best balls. You have a great piece out on Fantasy Alarm right now with some fades. We may touch on some of those as we go through the conversation. But tons of content out there in the best ball rooms are the best place, the laboratory, the place where you can go. Before we get into that, though, I know you do the Fantasy Cares Eliminators. You are a champion. I have won some of those as well. This year, I feel like I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I have no idea, like the coaches, the punters, it's always John Bosch is always putting some evil twists in there. How many coaches have you drafted, Britt?
I don't think I've drafted any in any of my eliminators because with coaches, you either get 10 points or you get 0 points. And for me, especially where I'm at in the draft process right now, I don't feel like that's a high enough ceiling. That's not to say once we get down into the nitty gritty and, I'm scraping at free agent players that I might not draft a coach, but I haven't yet.
I have gotten into, I do have an Andy Reid. I have one roster where I have only quarterbacks, tight ends, kickers, and coaches so far, and punters.
That's a unique build.
It's an experimental thing. I love the eliminators. I've been doing them since they started up, and I've had a fair amount of success. I feel like it's just like good luck, though, because I don't really feel like I actually know what I'm doing. But, the goal is not to get beat every week. If you guys aren't familiar with those, go out there, check out fantasycares.org, and you can sign up. I've got 2 going right now. You got any going right now, Britt?
Yeah, I'm in 5 right now. I
Okay.
decided after last year that having 10 or 15 going at the same time, I just ended up getting auto drafted because I couldn't keep up with it. So I limited myself to 5, and yeah, I'm still in the thick of it in all of them.
Yeah, I'm two. I'm going to start another one. I try to, stagger them a little bit, which is something I should do with my best balls. I just was in a best ball today where I think we all have probably too many of those going on at any one time. But I just realized I started wanting some Jahan Dotson shares. So I started, focusing on him without looking at the roster I'm drafting him on. So now I have my Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson stack in one league. I'm not sure how that's going to work out for me. I'm hoping the quarterback play picks up. But let's start with the quarterback position. I feel like the top 3 are going really early. How do you feel about that? Are you buying into the Josh Allen, Mahomes, Hurts, whatever order you like them in the top 3 rounds? Is that something you're into?
I have gotten a couple shares of Josh Allen and stacked him with Stephon Diggs in best ball because it's so easy to get him on the turn. But there's so much value to be had in like the 4th and 5th round at quarterback. You can get Joe Burrow, you can get Justin Herbert, and even in the late mid rounds, you can get Kirk Cousins, you can get Geno Smith, who both finished as QB1s. So I'm not completely reaching there in that 2nd round for those quarterbacks. But if I have the opportunity to take one of their wide receiver ones, then I'll go ahead and stack them.
Yeah, I feel, and the stacking is always great. I try to keep it organic. I don't want to force the stacks. I don't want to do I look. If you're drafting way too much, as probably both of us are, you tend to do things just because you've done so many things. And I do have some Kelsey Mahomes stacks, obviously going 1st and 2nd round on those, and I think it's fine. But generally speaking, I'm looking for something more organic. Like if I get, let's say, a DK Metcalf or somebody in the 3rd or something, and I'm coming around. You mentioned Geno Smith, who is a guy I think is a crazy steal right now, probably mid-range, middle of the pack quarterback too. What did he finish last year? Quarterback 5. How optimistic are you about Geno Smith this year? Can he carry this over? Was it a one-hit wonder?
Yeah, I think he can definitely carry it over. And last year, Seattle never really had a solidified wide receiver 3. But now with the addition of Jackson Smith and Jigba there, I mean, and then Zach Charbonnet on top of it, are you going to establish the run or are you going to pass it all over the place? Like, we just don't know. And those opposing defenses, I think, will have a harder time reading that offense. So I think his ceiling this year might even be higher than last year. I'm pretty bullish on Geno.
I am too, and I think it's a crazy, crazy value. I'm going to look on my best ball 10s, but my ownership percentage is way, way high on him. A couple comments. Everyone's saying hello, Britt, because everyone is very happy to see you. Also, Brian Larkin wanted to know, he has the 6 pick and a half point PPR league. Would he choose 6 pick overall? Would you choose Bijan or Travis Kelce with the middle of that 1st round pick? I feel like Bijan is riding the rocket to the top of the ADPs pretty quickly. Kelce giving you that leverage over the field. How would you stand here?
Oh man, it's so tough to pass up on Bijan because I love him, but I think that I lean Travis Kelce because of the positional scarcity in that tight end roster spot. You've got a huge drop off after Kelce, and they didn't really go out and add a huge number of receiving weapons to that roster in Kansas City. You got Rashee Rice, who I also love as a late round draft pick, but you also got rid of JuJu. So I think Kelce maintains his role in that offense, whereas Bijan, it's so hard. That Falcons offense just isn't as explosive as I want it to be at that spot.
They've been so run heavy, and they do have a good offensive line. You look down the stretch, what they did with Tyler Algier. I think we're projecting a lot of that onto Bijan, and look, he's going to get his 300 touches. I don't know if they're all going to come out of the backfield. They'll come as some as a receiver. I think this is a tough call. I am also taking Kelce. I mentioned that leverage over the field. He's like a tight end and a half, right? And you look at last year's points per game scoring. I think he was up over 15. The next closest was 11. So I mean, that's a player and a half. I want that kind of value. I think, to me, Christian McCaffrey gives me the opportunity to do that. We'll get back to the quarterbacks here, but I want to take this off the rails a little bit because that 1st round I think is a big deal, and I think there's 6 players. I've talked about this on previous live streams. There's 6 players. Last year, I focused on one single 1st pick overall. This year, I think if I have 6 first picks overall, I'm probably going to have 6 different players there just to mix it up a little bit. But I like McCaffrey. I think Ekeler's still in the mix for me, even with the questions. Obviously, the receivers, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. Cooper Kupp, for me, I'm way higher on him, I think, than other. Well, not way higher. I mean, how much way higher can you be? He's already at the top. But Kelsey's in that mix, too. Do you have any outliers that you feel like might push into that range, or do you feel differently about those top 6?
No, I think that you're right on track with that. Obviously, it's the Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Christian McCaffrey situation in the top 1. I have seen a couple people who have taken Bijan at 1 overall to differentiate themselves. And although it's bold, I don't think that it's necessarily a bad pick at 1 overall because, like you said, he is going to play everywhere. He's going to get backfield touches. He's going to get targets. Arthur Smith is notoriously run heavy. So I might sneak Bijan up there, but it's such a tough call. All these players are so good.
Here's the thing. Everyone we're drafting in the first round, we are drafting to hit their ceiling, right? I mean, it's the ceiling or you're going to be less than happy. So if you want Bijan Robinson and you have the first pick overall, that's going to be the only chance you have to get him, right? He's not going to be waiting there at the the last pick, 212. So you're going to have to get him. And I think, we should allow ourselves that grace of saying, look, I want this player. This is where I'm picking. I'm going to have to go ahead and pick him. Some other comments, by the way, you're very popular in the chat. Troy Olsen here for Britt Flinn, as we all are, Golf Boy, wants to know what you think of the New York Giants wide receiver core. Who are you drafting from the group? Everyone here in the chat knows who I'm drafting. Isaiah Hodgins is my guy. But this is all a cheap thing. Is there any reason to believe Darren Waller isn't the de facto wide receiver 1 there? And beyond that, does that limit if you agree with that, does that limit the wide receivers you're taking, or are there some values you like?
No, I think there are some values. Their wide receiver 3 on their depth chart right now is currently Paris Campbell. And Paris Campbell has not shown us, at least from a fantasy perspective, that he can produce in any capacity. So even if Darren Waller does take over as that wide receiver 1, I think that Jalen Hyatt has a real sneaky chance to get in there and start producing about midway through the season. He's going, I think, in the 10th-ish round, 10th, 11th round in ADP right now. And with Darius Slayton, with Hodgins, they've been fine. Not to crap on your pick about Hodgins, but they're fine. They're kind of Jags to me, in my opinion. Hyatt has that speed. He has that completely wild ability to separate. And I think that he works his way up if he learns the system fast enough.
Hyatt is a different piece. I don't disagree with you. I think Hodgins, obviously keeping these in context, you're drafting them late. And if you like any of them, I'm with you. I'm kind of out on Paris Campbell. Honestly, if I have, my druthers here, it's Darren Waller, and I'll let everyone else sort the rest out. I'm still in on Hodgins because I'm into the connection with the coach, right? He's the guy they went out, Joe Shane, formerly with Buffalo, Brian Dable, formerly with Buffalo. They brought him in. Look, you're not expecting wide receiver 1 numbers, anybody here. I think he was wide receiver 26 for the season after he showed up. So yes, we're not gonna change the games. And I think Hyatt might be the difference-making piece. I don't disagree with you there at all. I think, when you look at some of these receiving cores or some of these situations that are muddled, the different piece is sometimes the best piece. And the difference for him, speed. Like that Dynasty standard team, a few 24U in the chat would like to know which 2 to keep: Rachaad White, Cam Akers, James Cook, or Charbonnet. So 4 players: White, Akers, Cook, Charbonnet. He can keep 2.
Definitely keep Charbonnet. I think that's going to be really valuable going forward. And then who was after Rachaad White?
It was Akers, Cook, James.
So
Cook.
I would actually lean on Akers a little bit. If you look at what he did the last 3 weeks of the season last year, he put up over 100 yards in every single game. And he's still only 23. I know it feels like he's been in the league forever, but he's one of the younger backs who is a veteran in this league. So I think I would lean Akers and Charbonnet on that.
Yeah, I want to say Akers over the last, 4 weeks of the season, running back 4 or 5, somewhere in that range. And he was the only game in town. I get it. And hopefully Matthew Stafford is in a better position to throw the football. Sounds like he is. JSC would like us to quit talking about Cooper Kupp so he can grab him in the 3rd round. Not going to happen. maybe his own league, it might happen. I have Cooper Kupp as my wide receiver 1 this year. I think, again, looking at the average points per game last year, looking at the quarterback situation, I think there's reason for upside. Not that, look, I'm not going to, dispute that Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase are obviously right there. It's kind of a narrow band of players there that you're interested in. But I think there's every reason to believe Cooper Kupp can succeed, and I like Cam Akers as well. So go back to the quarterback situations. Some of the guys that I think, people are like, I don't know, or maybe projecting a little bit. Trevor Lawrence, going fairly high. I'm here for it. I think this is an ascendant offense. Calvin Ridley coming in helps. Are we getting overly excited about him, though?
I don't think so. I think, you say he's going high, but he's still the 8th quarterback off the board.
Yeah.
7, is he 7 now? When has he gone up to 7? Okay, he got a little bit more juice. What you mentioned with Calvin Ridley coming in there, I know a lot of people are polarized on him because he hasn't really played in 2 seasons, but his talent, defenses aren't going to be able to cover him, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and then you get those underneath with Evan Ingram, and then not even to mention ETN in the backfield with his pass catching ability. I think that this offense is really going to produce at another level this year, especially when you look at the AFC South and that level of competition there. You've got 2 rookies. You've got an old quarterback who may be phased out for a rookie. I think the Jags are going to have a really great season.
Yeah, he has slipped back to 8. He's definitely an underdog, and he has slipped back 8. I'm looking at I'm looking at both best ball 10s and underdog, and sometimes it depends on where I'm looking, my time frame on the best ball 10s. But I still think that's, an interesting point for him, and we are projecting some good news. Deshaun Watson going right there inside the top 10 as well, Britt. I feel like they're, I remember when he used to be good. They put some good pieces around him. Do you have a level of confidence in his rebound that drafters are having?
I really don't. I would feel more comfortable drafting him at around QB 12, QB 13. But QB 9 is just a little rich for me. We know that the Browns are going to remain run heavy. They still have Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb doesn't exactly get a lot of targets either. All of his touches revolve around just pounding the rock. And I'm still not sold that after that 2-year absence that Watson is really back mentally and or physically in football shape. So it's a little rich for me.
Yeah, seems fair. I think some of the guys that I think are a little rich. Let's talk about the rookie that seems to be rising up. People are taking wild swings with Anthony Richardson. I'm here for that. And, this is an approach I've taken for 1,000 years now that I've been playing fantasy football, and you don't think I'm not exaggerating. It's been 1,000 years. You get that. You can take that with maybe a swing for the fence play because of guys like Geno Smith or Daniel Jones or Jared Goff or the myriad of quarterbacks that are out there waiting that are giving you value. Are you a proponent of taking that chance on a guy we think has super high upside just because of his mobility?
I'm so torn between Anthony Richardson because on one end, he is so athletic and Shane Steichen lives and dies by the RPO. So he's going to get a ton of rushing yards. I apologize for my dogs in the background. They're
okay. I apologize for the lawn
as well, apparently. But then you look at his stats at Florida, and I think 26% of his passes were uncatchable. And so there still is that very developmental aspect in him. Now, I'm waffling on this because reports in recent days have come out and said, well, maybe he's not as developmental as we all were told during the pre-draft process. And I'm like, can somebody just tell us, is he or is he? Like, is he or is he not? Just let us know what's going on with him. But there has been such an emphasis on rushing quarterbacks and their upside in recent years. We've seen it with Justin Fields. We've seen it with Jalen Hurts, that he could meet value on rushing it alone.
Yeah, I think that's what people are betting on, right? And I think that's fair. I feel like, he's kind of a lottery ticket, right? And I want that high-end lottery ticket. I've kind of said if you're out there buying scratch tickets and there's a $20 ticket, $20 prize and $1 million prize, you buy the $1 million prize. And there are but you have to have fallback plans in place. By the way, Mr. Scampers offers his weekly reminder that Cooper Kupp dominated fantasy football the last 2 years in points per game. That's the Cooper Kupp I'm drafting. And I'm not a proponent of drafting the last 2 years' best players, but sometimes they're also this year's best players. So we'll find out about that. You mentioned Justin Fields is a player I think, we're sold on. So we've got Lamar Jackson with a new offensive coordinator. It sounds like they're going to throw the football a little more. The Bears are talking about throwing the football a little bit more. Do you think either of these teams will actually accomplish that goal?
Yeah, I think that, the addition of DJ Moore was exactly what the Bears needed to complete their wide receiving core. Darnell Mooney, as good as he was when Allen Robinson is there, in my opinion, is not a bona fide wide receiver 1. I think he fits in much better with that wide receiver 2 role. And with DJ Moore there, now he can slot back where he fits best, and no pun intended on slot. And you can kind of stretch the field a little bit with those. He also has that crazy rushing upside. So you can't just defend the pass. You've got to defend against the run. You've got to defend against Cole Kmet, everybody downfield. So I think that they can both take a little bit of a step forward.
All right. Related question to Trevor Lawrence. JSC would like to know, is Calvin Ridley in the 5th round a steal?
In my opinion, yes. I'm probably a little too overweight in my underdog drafts with Calvin Ridley because I just can't pass him up, especially in a best ball format. You've got incredible talent. And I think his last season, the stats are escaping me, but what did he finish as wide receiver 4 before he took that year off?
Right about there. Yes.
I think, yeah. And so in a best ball format, in round 5, he doesn't have to produce every week. You don't have to decide which games he's going to go off or produce. He's just going to be there, and he's going to be a solid foundation for your team. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think he's a complete steal.
That 2020 was a 90-catch, 1,300-yard, nearly 1,400-yard season, 9 TDs. And so I think there's a lot of upside, again, in that ascended offense. I think that is a true bargain. I would call that a value, and I would happily take it. Some of the other, quarterbacks that, I don't want to, overstate the case, but I will. No one has any business drafting rookies not named Anthony Richardson in redraft leagues this year, right?
Yeah, it's I'm kind of shocked seeing how high Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are going, even as QB2s. It takes a while for rookie quarterbacks to develop in their system, and you look at the weapons as well on both of these teams. Yes, Carolina got DJ Chark, they got Adam Thielen, but both of those guys have kind of been hurt, and aside from that, we have Terrace Marshall, who unfortunately has not done anything in his first 2 years in the league, and then brought in only Jonathan Mingo, who was very polarizing as far as his production goes in Ole Miss. With Houston, it's a lot of the same. You've got Nico Collins, you brought in an aging Robert Woods, who may or may not get hurt, and then you've got Tank Dell, who, although his stats speak well to his ability, he's very undersized, and I don't know how well that'll translate in the NFL. So, yeah, both of these other rookies have a tough road ahead of them, and as much as you love them on a personal level, it's not prudent to take them in redraft.
I think that's the key. I mean, like Dynasty, it's a whole different story. I'm not going overboard on Stroud. I think that's going to be a long haul for him. I think he's a great player, but circumstances still matter. I'll just ask you in general. We're going to get into wide receivers here in a second. By the way, talking to Britt Flinn, from Fantasy Alarm. And if you don't, you should be following her on Twitter at Britt_Flinn, 2 T's, 2 N's, just like you would expect, an I, FLINN. Fantasy Alarm, Lightning Round Fantasy, Fighting Chance Fantasy, Women of Fantasy Football. Great content, a rising star in the industry, and happy to have her here. And so keep the questions coming if you got them. Just in general, the running back class, I think there's some pieces here. To me, I want to go back to wide receivers. Wide receivers, there was a lesson last year I feel like I want to have learned. We look at a situation, we think this quarterback's not great. And so we dial back on the receivers. Last year, I dialed off. I was pretty much off Amari Cooper. I was pretty much dialed way back on DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. Turns out that even, not ideal quarterback situations don't always yield the worst results. Are you looking for situations like that this year where maybe you could leverage that value a little bit?
I kind of am. And a good example of that is DeAndre Hopkins right now. I think that so many people are off of him because they don't know when Kyler Murray is going to come back. Arizona is projected to finish dead last in the league with their win total projections. But Hopkins is such a great player. He's going to be a target funnel, and he's going to catch those targets. His wingspan is huge. He can make those contested catches. And I think that you're getting him in the 5th or 6th, if I'm not mistaken, best ball drafts.
Easy.
Yeah, go ahead. I want to know if I'm right or if my brain is just mushy.
Let me just double check on that. I'll go ahead and go into check on Underdog. But I got him in an auction. I just did an auction for the NBC Sports Edge magazine the other night. I got him for like $20, where the front line guys were going for 60. So I felt like I got a huge steal on that. Let's see, DeAndre Hopkins. I've got him at 18 right now in the last 2 weeks at the best ball 10. So right in that range. I mean, I'm looking at some of the names ahead of him. I'll bring up one of the names because I know it's in your Fade article, Deebo Samuel. I mean, he's going after a handful of players that maybe I'm not as keen on either. Tell us about Deebo.
Yeah, so Deebo, he's always been a favorite talent of mine. But outside of that wide receiver 2 season in 2021, where he did win a bunch of people their fantasy leagues, he's performed as wide receiver. Oh, I don't have it in front of me, but he hasn't performed as a wide receiver 3 or low end wide receiver 2 outside of that wide receiver overall 2 finish that he had. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's not getting as many rushing touches as he was in 2021. The addition of Christian McCaffrey really pushes his value down. And then you've got so much uncertainty at the quarterback position there. They came out yesterday and said Trey Lance is taking leaps and bounds and passing and da-da-da-da. And then brought Purdy maybe back. And then they came out with something that said that Sam Darnold looks incredibly good. This is all just coach speak. We don't really know who they're going to go with. And quite frankly, none of those quarterbacks excite me.
My yard guy totally agrees with that. Totally agrees with that. Few questions in here. Tony Lasswell wants to know, in Miami, do we see the rookie coming in and taking over from Mostert and Wilson? The rookie would be Devon Achane. I think a lot of people think that's going to be the case. I don't know. Where are you at on that, Britt?
I think that he's definitely going to have a role because he is so fast. And the fact that he's actually getting into football shape now that he's not running track is huge. He's adding a little bit of weight so he can burst through defenders. But Wilson and Mostert are still going to have a role. They're the big guys. They're going to get those carries in the red zone. And so I think that his upside is capped in Miami. He's going to get yardage. He's going to get carries. But I think when it comes to touchdowns, those are going to be vultured by the other 2 guys.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think they're all going to limit each other. There are things I like about that offense. The backfield is going to be one where we're going to be trying to sort out. There are a handful of backfields like that. We'll get on some of those. A few more questions, though. Golf Boy wants to know, does Britt have Jordan Love thoughts? Top 15 quarterback?
Oh, I can't do it with Jordan Love. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I just haven't seen enough. But I think that's what it is with everybody. We don't really know what to expect with Jordan Love. And then you look at the weapons that he has. Their wide receiver room, even after drafting Jalen Reed, has like 6 people on the depth chart. And then even getting Musgrave and Tucker Kraft, we've seen that it takes your 1 tight ends a little while to develop. I'm not sold on him. I'm sorry. I feel so bad because I want him to be a good thing after sitting behind Aaron Rodgers for so long, but I'm a little bit bearish on him.
To me, he's a 3rd quarterback if you're drafting 3 in best ball right now.
Yeah.
Maybe taking a little bit of a flyer. I need to see more. Obviously, the Packers think they have something, and their success over the course of time suggests they know more about this than I do, but I want to see it first. What do we think? So, and we're going to get to the running backs in general here, but there's some good questions here. The office. What do we think of the Bears running back room? We've got Khalil Herbert, Deontay Foreman, Roschon Johnson jumps in the mix. The Bears saying all kinds of great things, like they were shocked he was still available. They've created a mess for us. How are you handling the mess?
Yeah, the Bears backfield is a nightmare. So on one hand, you can look at the efficiency of Khalil Herbert from a yards per attempt perspective, and he's crushed. I'm one of the best in the league at yards per attempt. But his pass blocking leaves so much to be desired. And we've seen over and over and over again in this league, if you can't pass block as a running back, then you're not going to get those touches. I think Roschon Johnson actually does have a really good chance of working his way into the lineup later on in the season. Dante Foreman, as much as he's produced, he's old. And I'm sorry, it's really tough for older running backs to maintain their health. He hasn't played a full season in the past 2 seasons because he's come on as a free agent after somebody else gets hurt. And I wonder if he's forced into that full season volume role, how durable he's going to be. So, yeah, I really think that Johnson has a chance. Oh, I can't hear anything, Bob. Are you muted?
I am muted. I was trying to cut out the yard guys. Thank you, Britt. I think sometimes the best answer in these, like you look at Miami as well, sometimes the best answer, and look, we're speaking from a perspective. I know you're out there in the chat, and probably some of you are doing this as well, but we're in a ton of best balls. And so we have the opportunity to experiment things. And one of the reasons we do that is so we could share this information with you. And also it's great practice for our regular draft. So I'd highly recommend you all jumping out there. It's basically mock drafting with something on the line. So everyone's in it. But in a lot of these cases, and you have the luxury of, following different paths, but a lot of times the best path for me is the cheap guy. If I want to invest in one of those committees or one of those groups, I'll just wait till the last one goes. And then, it being unpredictable, it makes it hard. Someone wants to know what last year they're talking about. JSC mentions his biggest deal last year was Joe Burrow at 5.6. What was it? Do you remember your biggest deal, or were there any steals that stand out in your mind, Britt, from last year?
Oh man, I did so many drafts last year. I don't even really remember.
That's my problem.
What I think though that stands out is probably Tyler Lockett. I know you've already hit on that, but I was so out on Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf both. Everybody was just counting them out on all across the board. And then he came back in and finished as well or better as he always does. So, and I can't remember offhand where he was going last season, but
he was
going
crazy late last season. It was not double digit rounds, but it was heading that direction. And then one of the things that, look, for Tyler Lockett, it's at least 8 touchdowns in each of the last 5 years and a couple 10 touchdown seasons as well. And beyond that, it's 100 targets a year. And Jackson Smith and Jigba may change that dynamic a little bit. I think he's going to cut more into the tight ends roles. They had that multi-level tiers of tight ends that drew a lot of targets last year. I think those guys are going to be out of luck, and we're going to see, Metcalf with his 120 plus, Lockett with 100 plus, Smith and Jigba with 90. And as this team kind of morphs into more of Shane Waldron's vision of the offense than maybe Pete Carroll's vision of the offense. And I think we've seen that progression going on. So I think that's a great steal. Some of the guys like, I like to talk a lot about free square players, guys you get at the end of drafts that if they don't, work out, you don't care. You move on. You can't do that in best ball. But that's how you end up with guys like Jerick McKinnon, who for the final 6 games of the season was running back 4, right? You just funny things happen. So take your shots on late guys. Joe Burrow was a pretty good value at 5.6. I think Joe Burrow is kind of a value again this year. So we'll see how that plays out. A few two for you. Some of these names I get easily confused. He wants to know your opinion of DeAndre Swift.
If he can stay healthy, I think he's great. He went to a team with arguably the best offensive line in the entire league. But that if is a big one because he has yet to complete a full season. On top of that, you've got a rushing quarterback. And when you have a rushing quarterback, you typically seed both touches and targets. That said, he's going so late, I think in the 4th or 5th round, depending. I think that's a little bit of a value there, and you can afford to take that risk. So, yeah, I'll bite at that price point.
And Andrea has a related question, wants to know how you're handling the Detroit backfield, another team with a great offensive line, but kind of in the same boat we were in last year, just different bases.
So what I really think is that they are going to move Gibbs and work him in the slot a ton. I think that Montgomery is going to be one of the pure running backs, and then Gibbs is going to be a PPR monster. So I think that they can both have independent value, especially if Gibbs gets out in space in any capacity. This guy is crazy good and crazy fast when he gets out in space. So yeah, I think that you could take both of them and reward yourself.
Totally agree with that. This is the Football Diehards Ask Me Anything live stream. We're here at noon every Saturday. We do it on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. as well. I like to bring in guests like today's great guest, Britt Flinn from Fantasy Alarm. Obviously feeling us out great information here. So keep the questions coming if you have them. Tony Laswell has one. What's the take on Zeke now? No one has picked him up, and I'm pretty sure he's done in Dallas as well. Your thoughts? I'm not sure he's as done in Dallas. I don't know. Money is going to be the issue. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm wondering if a lot of teams are waiting until that June 1st deadline to make some cuts and restructure and rearrange some stuff in their salary cap and then bring him in. I don't think Zeke is done at all. He may not be as good as he was when he came out, but you look at the other running backs out there like Kareem Hunt and Leonard Fournette, I still think that Zeke has a lot more to offer than they do. And depending on the progression of Tony Pollard's rehab from that ankle injury that he suffered in the playoffs, Jerry just might bring Zeke back. So I would not count him out. I like getting him in late rounds as kind of a what if flyer, kind of like how people were taking Odell Beckham last year. Obviously, that didn't work out too well for us, but I think that Zeke's going to be a different story.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I don't have a lot of shares of him because I feel like I have time to adjust when I find a landing spot. And we'll get into some of the running back intrigue here. Might as well while we're doing it. What Brian Larkin wants to know what we think the percentage split will be between Penny and Swift. I'm going to chime in here to start off. I've talked to two different beat writers in the last month about this, and guys that have, reputable guys who covered the team quite some time. Chris Franklin from NJ.com, among others, and they feel like Rashad Penny's going to be the guy or the leading piece of this as long as he's in the locked up and upright position. If that's the case, I'm old enough to remember the Rashad Penny who ran for 200 more yards over the course of the last 6 games of the 2021 season, running behind that offensive line. I feel like it's a little bit of a gamble with that backfield, but he's so cheap right now. I want to say he's in running back 40 territory. How do you feel about that backfield? And what do you think this split might be yourself?
Yeah, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, that DeAndre Swift staying healthy is a big if, as is Penny. But Penny's kind of showed in the past 2 seasons that he's still got it. I think it's worth it if you're uncertain about either of those two to take the later guy, because you get a little bit of value and you don't have as much capital invested in that. I think that the split could be around 40-60 in Swift and Penny, but I just don't know. I'm not really sure what to expect until I see anything from camp.
Well, what if I told you could right now get a best ball 10s anyway over the last 3 weeks here is where I have it dialed in. Ezekiel Elliott going ahead of Rashad Penny, Leonard Fournette going ahead of Rashad Penny, Antonio Gibson going ahead of him, Zach Charbonnet, Khalil Herbert. I mean, I feel like that there's some value to be had there in Penny. And granted, I know people have injury concerns. I don't. I'm not scared of injuries because they're going to happen to just about anybody. And I know he's had more than others, but just seems like a good spot. Look, any investment, late in somebody running behind that offensive line, I would say the same for Montgomery. I think he's been a pretty good value too. But it's that offensive line, I think, that makes a difference for me.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think when you can get a value like that with potential ceiling, then you have to take it.
Yeah, it's a cheap roll of the dice. How much of a concern Charles Davis wants to know this? How much of a concern that Richardson will significantly lower Jonathan Taylor's ceiling? Do running backs with such an athletic quarterback often finish in the top 10?
It is funny that you bring that up because I mentioned that in my latest article over at Fantasy Alarm. And I had Jonathan Taylor as one of my fades at ADP. He's going as running back 4 right now. And yes, for that very exact reason, because I think that Richardson touches the ball and rushes it a lot more. I don't think JT sees that same amount of volume that's going to get him to that RB4 payoff spot.
I think it could be a little bit of an issue. Jonathan Taylor, last year was, I think a little bit of an outlier. I think Jonathan Taylor is a better player than that. But if you're worried about Richardson being a limiting factor, I think it's hard not to worry about that. It is gonna be something. Ask anyone who's played running back in the Buffalo offense in recent years with Josh Allen hogging all the goal line carries. It's just, it's a fact of life. So totally agree with you there, Britt. And by the way, check that article out on Fantasy Alarm. It's fantastic. I read it myself. JSC would like you to compare Bijan Robinson to Austin Ekeler.
Ooh, so here's the thing about Austin Ekeler. As great as he has been for us, both in real life and fantasy, Austin Ekeler has never had a 1,000-yard rushing season. He basically functions as kind of a hybrid back, but the targets are so funneled towards him that he makes it work. Bijan can do everything. I can definitely see Bijan having over 1,000 yards and probably 75-ish targets throughout the course of the season, and that's lowballing it a little bit. I think Bijan's ceiling is a lot higher, and especially in that offense where Arthur Smith just wants to run, I think that Bijan could absolutely crush, and he could leapfrog Ekeler as the overall RB1.
I think every year, I don't want to say that every year. I thought last year there was that Ekeler was in a really, really dangerous spot regarding touchdown regression. That didn't happen. Touchdowns are weird, people. So if you're banking on them, you can go either way. Sometimes it doesn't always go the way it went for Ekeler last year, and we'll see how he plays out. Totally agree with what you said, though, Britt, about the rushing equity there. He's working as a receiver. We're thinking the same thing about Tony Pollard, I think. I've seen him. If you look at the draft in the background from one of our recent magazine drafts, he went tail end of the first round. I think that's defensible. But he's kind of been climbing up. I haven't seen him go that early in most of the drafts. Where are you at on him?
Yeah, he's getting a little bit of juice, I think, because they waited until the 6th or 7th round to get Deuce Vaughn, and then they just have Ronald Jones, so there really isn't a bunch of competition. My issue with Tony Pollard is that I worry about his ability to run between the tackles if anything happens to that offensive line. And we've seen it over and over with Dallas. As good as that offensive line is, they are very prone to injury. I think that he works better when he works out of the slot and runs outside. And as the primary back, I'm not entirely sure that he can be the guy to get it done. Now, with that said, the way that the NFL is structured, there are very few bell cow backs. And outside of, the CMCs, the Derrick Henrys, the Saquons, you're not really going to find, and the Bijans now, you're not really going to find another running back with that amount of volume. So it's kind of a give and take. It depends on your level of risk aversion. But I think that Pollard could deliver there as long as everybody on that line stays healthy.
Yes, risk tolerance is a personal thing for all of us. I've talked about it a lot here. I'm kind of, injury agnostic. I feel like anybody can get hurt. I totally agree that there are players who seem more prone to it. I think it tends to be more related to their workload than their toughness or whether they're brittle or not. And there's some guys that disprove that. Derrick Henry would be one. Christian McCaffrey, though, look, when you're in 25 car collisions every week, bad things can happen. It's kind of the two-edged sword of fantasy football. We're looking for that heavy workload, and that heavy workload is something that can put players at risk. You have to deal with it. And I think, tell me what you think about this, Britt. I have a theory. You can have risky players on your roster without having a risky roster, right? You can find safe plays at different price levels if you're taking chances at various points in the draft, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we saw that last year with Christian McCaffrey. Everybody was like, do I pass on him? Do I take him as RB2? And those of you who took him, we realized that he was risky because he had such a high ADP in years prior and hadn't delivered on that. But you were able to just build this juggernaut of a roster. Kind of the same thing with, I think, what's going on with Javonte Williams right now. People are taking him based on what Sean Payton is saying, that they hope that he's ready by camp. But you get such a value on him right now that if you believe that he's going to be back, then you're getting a stud. Personally, I don't think that he's going to be back, but that's one of those things we have to wait and see. But when a player falls so much in ADP, you've got so much built-in value there that you can make it work.
Yeah, there becomes a point where I'm like, there's nobody I won't say I'll never draft. That said, 50 best ball drafts into the season, I have 0 shares of Javonte. I have 0 shares of Alvin Kamara. I don't think the outcome for Kamara is going to be a positive one, and maybe worse. Look, either way, and you can take your chances there, people. I'm not, telling you not to take chances on Javonte either. I mean, at some point I will. I'd like to have a little more clarity on him. And maybe I'm taking, like playing personal favorites, and that's something we have to watch out as well. I'm not as worried about Breece Hall. I don't care. He'll be back, and when he's back, I think he'll be fine. Or at least I have some level of confidence that he'll be back at some point. Where are you at on Breece Hall?
Yeah, I think his injury, the severity of the injury is one of the more minor as it can be on an ACL scale. It's not like Javonte's where it's the ACL, the LCL, and the PLC. It's not a complex knee injury. And he's already been jogging. He's already been running on the treadmill. I think even if he does miss, it will only be a couple of weeks. And the absolute upside that he has to offer and his ceiling is well worth taking that 2 weeks off just to have him on your roster.
Yeah, getting a few questions. That is exactly right, by the way. But so some questions here about Cordero Patterson, who like I've said, get the cheapest option. I do think in best ball, he still maybe has a little home run playability. Generally speaking, though, the question was, is Cordero Patterson not fantasy relevant anymore was one question. Tony Laswell asked, is Cordero Patterson last in the running back food chain in Atlanta, or do you still see him being very involved? He sees Bijan as the home run guy. I think that's a fair argument too. But I think Cordero will still have a role, but I'm not looking to get him even on the cheap.
Yeah, I'm very worried that he could be a cap casualty. We kind of touched on it earlier, but those June 1st cut designations, it saves teams a bunch of money and they need to work around and restructure things. At his age and how much money they're paying him, I very much think that he could be cut. So I'm staying away from him just because of that. They've got other young running backs in their room. That's not to say that he couldn't deliver, but I just don't want to take that chance and basically waste a roster spot on a what if.
Yeah, I think it's funny because we all, like we said, I sit here and I try to practice what I preach, right? I want to say I'm in on anybody, but there are players who, I'm just not as interested in. We all have our own biases. I'm hoping like by us discussing these things, it opens my mind up to things. Reading the comments opens my mind up to some things, because you should go in and you should say, oh, maybe I should think about this differently than I have. But man, with guys like Williams and Alvin Kamara, I'm struggling with them. And Cordero, I mean, he's cheap if he's out there in the 13 to 16, 18 round range. I mean, I think there's something to be said for them. Some other running backs there. By the way, thanks, Roscoe. I appreciate the comment. Thoughts on Jimmy G and fantasy relevance? Let's go ahead and hit that one. I think this was a totally lateral move for the Raiders and Devontae Adams in particular. I think he's the piece I'm worried about. But I do think Jimmy G is maybe a reasonably solid second quarterback in best ball, maybe in redraft as well. But I don't see a high end there.
Yeah, he's definitely not a high ceiling type of player, but he is a good game manager. So if you're looking for a solid floor, especially at a QB2 position, I think that he could be serviceable there. That said, I'm not super stoked on him or really a lot of the other weapons. I'm a little bit down on Michael Mayer because of having Jimmy G as his quarterback. I know that everybody's like, he's the second coming of Gronk, but I just don't see that happening with that passing volume there. But he'll be fine. He shouldn't turn the ball over as much as Carr did. He shouldn't make as many mistakes, mostly because he is a game manager type. So he's like fine. When you want Doritos and you get plain tortilla chips, that kind of thing. He's not bad, but he doesn't get anybody excited.
Totally fair assessment. His injury history is not great. Again, I'm trying to ignore that. I think Josh Jacobs is in a good spot again, coming in there on the franchise tag. If they were willing to run the wheels off him last year, he's a rental car again this year. It's a 1-year rental, and I'm expecting nothing different. Brian Larkin wants to know, would it be wise for Travis Etienne owners to save a late spot for Tank Bigsby in their drafts?
Ooh, You know what? I kind of do like that. I'm a huge fan of Tank, watching him at Auburn. Um, but we kind of saw last year as well. They brought in Snoop Connor and they traded up to get him. Um, I would kind of lean towards, I think Hasty is still there, if I'm not mistaken.
He is still there. Yep.
I'm super sleepy and my brain is not working today. Um, but yeah, so right now Tank is listed on the depth chart ahead of Hasty, actually. So yeah, if Tank is going to be the guy, especially watch that going into training camp and more of the OTAs, but handcuffing is never a bad idea.
Right, I totally agree with that. By the way, Mike Dempsey, my co-host on the SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio program, Football Diehards, which is on tonight from 7 till 9 p.m. Eastern. Jorge Martin will be joining us tonight. We'll have Packers and Titans beat writers, so check that out. But Dempsey has a little intel, and Tank Bigsby, apparently Tank is not his actual name. It was given to him because he looks like one of those, apparently. So there we have it. Mr. Scampers will never draft Chosen Anderson. I have some shares of Robbie, but no Chosen. So no new shares of that. Tony Lasswell wants to know how we feel the New Orleans backfield will play out. Kendre Miller, Jamal Williams, Alvin Kamara, the pieces in play here. What do you think?
Oh man, that is so messy. Mostly from that legal situation that Camaro's got going on. I think that he filed for a speedy trial motion because he wants to get this done and over with. But we've seen time and time again how long the legal process can play out. The league is not going to do anything until that is 100% resolved. So all of that is up in the air. If that does happen, which I'm kind of more inclined to.
July 31st now. Let me throw that in there. So,
yeah,
but we don't know how long it'll take, right? I mean, it could be a 6 or 8 week trial and run into the season, and we'll have no idea as we're drafting what the outcome's going to be.
Right. And then there could also be other motions, other new discovery, all kinds of things that would push that trial back. What I'm inclined to believe is that I think I agree with you that this is not going to end well for Alvin Kamara. I think Kendre Miller really could take over. He was so good in college. And Jamal Williams is great. He's a great goal line back, but he's also on the older side. And I don't know if he can handle that volume. So I think by the end of the season, we see Miller coming out on top.
Yeah, I know it seems weird to draft this way, but I mean, you have to realize that a running back somebody either didn't draft or drafted very late generally wins somebody a championship like every year in fantasy football. So watch for those guys who might emerge, and landing them, early or late in your drafts is not a bad idea, rather than fight for them on the waiver wire later on. Speaking of late round player, Jameson Williams, JSC says, is one of his biggest late round targets. He's going to miss the 6 games. There's something to be said for that, right?
Yeah, going in with a 6-game hole just to handicap you right from the start, I'm not a huge fan of that. I would prefer waiting until he shows up on waivers in redraft. In best ball, I'm kind of just avoiding him altogether unless I can get him at a severe discount. I don't want somebody sitting on my roster who's not going to produce for 6 weeks. That's just not, doesn't seem very fiscally responsible to me.
Yeah, and some of that may depend on your roster configurations, what you're allowed to keep, what you're not allowed to have. And on the shallow benches, I'm with you. I don't want to have players that can't come in and contribute immediately. You shouldn't be digging that deep. But if you do have room, there's something to that. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I'm feeling like he is my new Keenan Allen, who is still a thing, but we don't know how much longer. But like if you're taking some boom bust, I talked earlier, you can have risky players without having a risky roster. I feel like guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Keenan Allen are the guys that make your roster less risky.
Yeah, absolutely. Those guys with high upside who are target funnels always make your roster better. I'm kind of looking at some of these rookies, and I know that it's not always great to look at rookies, but Jordan Addison, I think, is a guy who can really deliver and can be a boom guy on your roster spot with that volume that Minnesota continuously uses. He's likely going to be at least the number 3 in targets, but he could end up being second in targets on that entire team. Just guys like that have high targets or in a good offense, they can really make or break your team.
Yeah, totally agree with that. We've only got a few minutes left. If you have questions, please get them in for Britt Flinn. She's done a fantastic job today. We will have her back, unless she hides from me. After listening to my yard guys howl in the ear for this hour. So, by the way, Brian Larkin hopes we both do well in the Scott Fish Bowl. I did get my invite. I'm very excited. I got to figure out where I'm going to play. So, just before we get out of here, because we haven't touched on it a lot, how are you approaching the tight end position this year?
As I mentioned earlier, I really think it's Travis Kelce and then everybody else. I have a love-hate relationship with the tight end position. I'm definitely not going after a ton of these rookies as much as I want to. Dalton Kincaid certainly has a huge ceiling in that Buffalo offense, but I don't necessarily like their historical use of 12 personnel. They ran it at the least percentage in the entire league last year. So if they're going to move him to the slot, they're going to have to make some pretty serious changes. I'm looking for guys like Darren Waller, kind of like Pat Freiermuth that you can get in those later rounds, because after Kelce, there's such a drop-off that you're pretty much all going to shake out in the same way specifically. So if you don't get Kelce, wait a little bit and get one of those later round tight end ones.
Yeah, I want to ask you about some of maybe the popular ones. I think one that's kind of like the sexy pick right now is Chigakonkwo. Are we overthinking this a little bit, or maybe over-projecting based on a handful of big plays? It was impressive, right? But was it consistent enough?
Yeah, I like Chig, and obviously, I don't know if you can see it, but my Treylon Burks ball is always here. Huge fan of Treylon Burks. But I'm a little worried about Tennessee's passing attack. There's definitely going to be a very high target percentage that goes to both of them. But with only two of those guys on the team, are the defenses just going to key in on them? And are they going to be able to make those plays? But what's he going at right now? Like tight end 11, I think? That might
it's
be
really cheap right now. I got it right in front of me here. I'll bring it up. But yeah, I think it's a fair price. Like I think in underdog he's what? Tight end 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He is 11 to 12 right now.
Okay.
He's in the same range, going a little ahead of Cole Kmet, Greg Dulcich, going after Dalton Schultz and Dalton Kincaid both. But kind of after that group that you said, Freiermuth, David Njoku, Evan Ingram, Darren Waller up ahead of him. So I do think if you miss out on those guys, he is a name that stands out to me. Maybe Cole Kmet's one that we're overlooking, though.
Yeah, Cole Kmet has disappointed so many people year after year because everybody's like, this is Cole Kmet's breakout year. We're going to finally see it. And Chicago just hasn't had that pass volume. But now with the addition of DJ Moore and kind of spreading that offense out on the field a little bit, I think that Kmet could finally see his targets. I'm not flag planning yet, but I'm cautiously scouting the terrain.
Yeah, Zara Kansabedian wants to say Chig was incredibly efficient with his touches last year. That's right. It's like a top 3 among wide receivers, tight ends. He was super efficient. Can he maintain that efficiency? That's my concern. Super athletic. I like everything about him except maybe the Tennessee passing attack. Sorry, Treylon Burks. The same with him. Is he like a super huge value for you? I mean, he's going really late. So there's some wide receiver ones. We'll close it on to this. I think, Treylon Burks going very late. Nico Collins, you're assuming he's going to be wide receiver 1 going very late. Are there some people on these outlier offenses or less than expected passing attacks that have your interest?
Yeah, I've definitely Burks. I'm getting him everywhere that I can. But what I've also seen is that JuJu has fallen very, very low, sometimes almost close to the double-digit rounds. I know we're not expecting a lot of things out of New England's offense, but JuJu's kind of that guy that runs those short A-dot routes that New England really thrives on. So I think this change of scenery could do him well. And with the departure of Jacoby Myers, they really don't have that much depth on their receiving roster. So I think that JuJu could be one of those really big value guys that helps you win a league.
Yeah, a lot of hopes for this offense with Bill Bryan taking it over after they went without offensive coordinators last year. Probably wasn't the best choice for them. Well, there he is. I wondered where the yard guy was going to show up for the very end. I want to thank Britt Flinn for coming in today. Follow her on Twitter at Britt Flinn, BRITT_FLINN. You know her work from Fantasy Alarm, Lightning Round Fantasy, Fighting Chance Fantasy. Check out the podcast, The Women of Fantasy Football. Fantastic stuff there. Her story in the making. You'll see Lisa Ann on May 23rd. I'm super excited to watch that, Britt. And I hope you'll come back at some point here in the near future. And also we'll work to get you on the radio program.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope you will have me back because it's always a blast. And yeah, I enjoy talking with one of the greats.
All right, everybody. We'll see you Wednesday night, 7 p.m. We'll do something if you want to listen on the radio to me and Mike Dempsey tonight, 7 p.m. on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio. Go to the FootballDiehards.com website. If you want to buy something, use the promo code DieHards to get a 15% discount. Follow me on Twitter at FootballDiehard, and have a great day.